Okay, welcome to part 4 of the complete guide to InfluxDB 2. In this tutorial, we're going to be taking a look at collecting metrics with Telegraf. Telegraf is one of my most favoritist tools ever because it has just such extensive support for collecting metrics from anywhere. And I mean almost anywhere. I've given many talks on Telegraf over the years, and specifically around cloud-native architectures and patterns for scaling your metric collection pipeline. I will be giving that lecture on this course again with some new details and tips, so stay tuned for that. Today, we want to understand how to start collecting metrics with Telegraf. Here is our InfluxDB that we have set up previously, and we are not collecting any metrics. We have the buckets that we created on the last tutorial, but that's it. Now we can jump over to our Telegraf configuration here, and we'll just delete the one that we created when we were experimenting. And we'll do that again. We're going to create a system one, we're going to store it for 1 hour, and we're going to click continue. We will name this system monitoring, some good description, and we will click create. Now what we're going to do this time is copy this to the clipboard and export it. And copy this and run it. So what we're doing here is exporting our influx token, which I now see that is slightly covered by the header, but that's okay. We're using something in Telegraf that's relatively new, which is the remote configuration, and that you can actually store your Telegraf TOML files as GitHub gists on static site hosts like S3, GCS, Netlify, any of these things, and just tell Telegraf to consume them, provided they're in a public endpoint or something that you have secured locally. There's also options for providing authentication for these endpoints, but we won't be covering that today. So we can hit return, and our Telegraf has started, and what we should see, hopefully, in around 10 seconds time, that it begins to write metrics to our InfluxDB instance. Now, some useful output from Telegraf when you get started is the loaded inputs. Really, you want to ensure that the plugins that you have enabled appear here. We're not using aggregators or processors, although we will have tutorials on them later. And we are writing our data to InfluxDB v2. And if we pop over here and say listen for data, we'll see connection found. So it looks like everything is working just as expected. We can click on 1 hour, and now we see our measurements showing up in our InfluxDB. We'll change the window to 5 minutes, and we can see we have this nice steady line for the usage guessed. And if we take a look at network, it might be a bit more active. Perhaps not, but that's okay. And we can start to see those metrics coming in now. And of course, my face is covering up the most useful bit. Now, configuring and working with Telegraf is really simple, straightforward, trivial. You just have to configure it a couple of times to really get to grips with what you're doing. So we're going to make a few changes to our Telegraf config. We're going to come to here. We're going to click on it. And this allows us to copy and paste the whole thing. Like so. So there's a fair amount of comments, but you'll see here that we have the agent configuration block, which is denoted here by a single square parens. We can configure the interval at which we wish to collect our metrics. We can set the round interval. This is great when you have Telegraf running across multiple nodes in your infrastructure and you want the time alignment on your metrics to work. So that means that if you have your interval set to 10 seconds, as the example here is kind of showing us, that every point that will be written to our InfluxDB will be on the hour with 0 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 40 seconds, 50 seconds, and then back to 0. Just means you don't have to do any juggling if the telegraphs are not all started at precisely the same time across your machines. Now, two of my favorite flags in the Telegraf config are the metric batch size and the metric buffer limit. This is how you get your resiliency when you are collecting metrics with Telegraf. The metric batch size, Telegraf will attempt to collect that many metrics and write them to the output so that you're not writing a single metric with every request. It's going to increase the throughput and performance of your Telegraf agent. The metric buffer limit is there in case your output should happen to be down or throw in errors. If your database is down and Telegraf cannot write to it, it is going to hold up to 10,000 points in memory and drop the oldest if it comes to that. You can set this to whatever value you want. You really need to understand how important your metrics are and how much memory you have available for this Telegraf to be able to store those in memory if required. We have a collection jitter. This is a parameter which allows each of the Telegraf plugins to stagger the requests that they make to the system for metrics. You don't normally want to have 10, 20, 30, 100, 1,000 Telegraf agents collecting metrics from similar endpoints or similar systems and all hitting them at the same time. So we can jitter the collection just to avoid things like that. The flush interval allows us to say how often we should write to our output. So we have a collection interval and then a flush interval. And we can jitter the flush as well. So if you do happen to have 100 Telegrafs running on 100 machines all writing to a single database, you don't want them all to land at the exact same millisecond. Potentially bad. So you can use a jitter to stagger that too. Okay. Precision. You can tell Telegraf to store higher resolution metrics by storing the timestamp of collection in nanoseconds, milliseconds, microseconds, or seconds. Debug is the first thing we're going to change today, and we're going to enable that to true so that we can understand what is happening when we run Telegraf. Now, omit hostname is a flag that is entirely optional, and I want to talk about it right now. So if you're running Telegraf in an ephemeral environment, where maybe it's containers, maybe it's Kubernetes, then storing the hostname of where Telegraf runs may not be that important to your overall metric strategy. However, in more traditional environments where you look after your infrastructure and you take care of each of those machines, then understanding the hostname may be important. So if you're collecting operating system level metrics, yes, keep the hostname there. If you're running in an ephemeral environment as containers, probably best to just omit it. You don't really want the pod name or container name to be available as a host name. Doesn't make a lot of sense there. Okay, now we're going to leave our output configured, but we're going to leverage something else that is very cool about Telegraf, and that you can actually write your metrics to multiple locations. So as well as writing to InfluxDB2, we want to understand what these metrics look like so we can see them in our system. Maybe we're doing some sort of experimentation, testing, or debugging, and we can just say write these files to standard out. So we're going to have live feedback from Telegraf as it attempts, or as it is collecting these metrics. We'll still write them to InfluxDB2. What I see a lot of people doing is writing to InfluxDB2 and InfluxDB1 and maybe Thanos and maybe M3. You know, you may just be experimenting with what backend store you need for your metrics, and that's okay. Telegraf can just hook in there and work with anything. We're not going to go over the inputs. They're all mostly self-explanatory. What I will show you is how to understand the inputs that are available and how to configure them. The best thing you can do is go to the Telegraf repository. So that's github.com/influxdata/telegraf. From here, you can click on plugins. You will see inputs and outputs. Those are the two that you will use the most, with inputs being the one that you want to be, maybe you're perhaps more curious about and want to understand. You can scroll up and down this and you'll see all of the systems that Telegraf knows to how to fetch metrics from. What we'll do is we will go to Prometheus. We will click on this. We want to be able to collect some Prometheus metrics. You can see an example from the configuration of how to enable it. If there are any optional flags, they're all available here, and we can uncomment them or copy and paste the code that we need for the configuration. At the bottom of every README for these plugins is an example of the output too. We'll see here, these are the metrics that are going to be emitted, by this plugin. we'll add one more metric to our configuration. And I have a Prometheus running on my local machine, and hopefully we should see some metrics come from here. So now we're just going to run Telegraf like we did before, but instead of a remote configuration, we are going to use the telegraf.conf that we have just edited and saved on our machine. We will hit return, and within a few seconds, we should start to see one extra debug output, which we already have here, and the output file plugin, which is going to spit a whole bunch of metrics, like so, to our terminal. This allows us to confirm that we're seeing what we expect to see. Now we can jump over to here, click cancel on this and explore. And now we have more metrics and measurements available inside of our 1 hour bucket. You can see the Prometheus style ones all start with go underscore because it's using the go runtime to understand our Prometheus is healthy. And there's some Prometheus specific ones below here. So we have configured Telegraf. We understand some of the agent configuration to change the interval, the flush interval, the batch and buffering, as well as any jitter that may be needed for our environment. We know how to use the Telegraf GitHub page to find new plugins and understand our configuration and output. And we can run Telegraf with remote configurations or local configurations to get metrics written to our InfluxDB. So I hope that helps. We'll be doing more. So I hope that helps. We'll be doing much more with Telegraf throughout this course, and I look forward to sharing it with you more. Have a great day.